just gone sideways.
Well, Tom, Nash, thank you very much for coming on Just Gone Sideways.
Thanks for having me.
AKA DJ Hookie.
Yep.
I think it's important to paint the picture for people that are just, if they're listening to the podcast without seeing the YouTube video, that you have these visually amazing prosthetic hooks for hands, which is obviously where DJ Hookie came from.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I was thinking...
It'd be weird if it came from somewhere else and then I had to adopt the hooks just to be on brand.
Cut them off! I was thinking, like, when you were brainstorming names, your DJ name, I was like... I was like, DJ Hookie, what was that? I was like, DJ Hookie must have been like towards the top of the list. I mean,
well, it was that because I was just called Hookie generally.
Okay.
Before I was a DJ, you know, colloquially referred to me as Hookie, and I kind of went with it because it's easier to remember. And I was spending a lot of time in nightclubs where people were off their face.
Yep.
And so if you say, "Hey, it's Tom," it's like, yeah, there's 50 Toms. There's enough Toms for a drum kit in this fucking nightclub. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
But there aren't many hookies, and then backing it up with the guy who's DJing with hooks for hands. It's like
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I was trying to think. Yeah, even if you were trying to brainstorm the list, it would be like DJ Hookie or like Captain Hook or like that's probably
the Claw, something like
good
that.
one.
Yeah.
That's also funny. Like in Australia, we have such a reverent sense of humor that you're known colloquially as Hookie, right? Whereas in some other places of the world, they'd be like, "Oh, that's really insensitive. That's offensive."
Yeah, probably actually. Yeah, I mean, well, you tap into that in your comedy. A lot of it's self-deprecating, right? And I think that's something that Australians do quite well, and British do quite well.
Yeah,
I
true.
think. But it just becomes part of that cultural fabric that we all have, and so it's interesting. I don't think I've spoken to many Americans about what they think about the fact that I'm called Hookie.
Yep.
But I have never DJ'd over there, actually, weirdly. I do speaking stuff over there and podcasts and things, but not... and so they would refer to me as Tom.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah.
But if you're already going to be over there speaking, couldn't you just put like your hooks up for a DJ spot?
Oh, I guess I could, yeah. I hadn't really thought about that, but... I'm not sure whether I'm interested in doing that. Also, I don't really know the landscape over there as well as I do over here.
Yeah, okay. I only asked that because, like, if I was in another country for another reason, and then I would be also just looking up to try and do a few comedy spots. So I wasn't sure if that works the same with DJing, that you just you have such a hunger for it that wherever you're going, you're like, oh, maybe I can jump on.
I see. I don't have a hunger for it. I can't. Every time I get booked for a DJ set, I'm pissed off.
You're like, fuck again?
Not again.
So let's talk about, I guess, that path to how you became known as Hookie, and then how you got into DJing. So where'd you grow up? Where were you born?
So I was born in South Africa, actually. Yep. I'm not South African, nor are either of my parents, but my father was moving around for work a lot when I was a kid, and so I happened to be born in Cape Town.
Yeah.
And then I don't remember it, as I was only there for a couple of years, and then I moved to Texas. And I
have you got siblings?
No.
Yep.
Well, I have a half sister and some stepsisters, but not full siblings.
Yeah.
And so I lived for 6 years in Dallas growing up, and then I came to Sydney around 89, 90, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah.
So my general story was that I was a pretty run-of-the-mill boring teenager, just going to school. I used to play guitar. I was actually, quite fond of music, and I think it was for the reason that I always wanted a creative outlet more than anything else. But I was quite proficient at guitar even from a young age, and being more or less self-taught. And
where'd you go to school?
I went to Newington.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
You went to
Riverview.
Riverview. That's right. Yeah. I think I've been there.
Yeah.
Because they used to force us to go to other schools on weekends to play sport.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way,
I remember playing basketball against Newington a bunch of times.
Right. Okay. So how old are you? May I ask?
I'm 37.
37. Okay. So you're a little bit younger than me. But back when I was in high school, nothing was digitized, and so you could actually get out of doing sport altogether if you knew how to cheat the system.
What's the trick?
Okay. So in the 90s, what they would do is they would have these boards up at school, and they would have listed on pieces of paper who was signing up to each sport. And as you well know, in each season, there's different sports that you can do, but there's usually two main competitors. For instance, it might be basketball or cricket or something like that. And I think, in certain seasons, there are no sports that I'm not a sporty person at all. And it would be like, football or cricket or something. I don't know what the seasons are. And so you'd have to sign up for one of them.
Yeah.
So what I would do is I'd sign up for both of them.
Yeah.
And then I would go to the first training lesson of each one on like a Tuesday.
Yeah.
And I would say to the guy, hey, the cricket guy, I'd say, hey, I'm actually not coming in because I signed up for football. And then I'd go to the football one and I'd say, hey, I'm not coming, I signed up for cricket or whatever, right? And then each of the captains of each thing would look at the other board and see my name on it and think that I'd moved and cross me off.
Wow.
So for the whole season, I technically didn't exist.
So there were
no roll calls.
You figured out this little loophole.
Yeah. Well, a loophole is legal. I'm not sure this was.
Yeah. and did you tell other mates, or was this just your little secret?
I don't remember actually. I had a really good way of getting out a lot of things. Also, did you guys have like Duke of Edinburgh and cadets and things?
Yep.
And I think I did 1 week of cadets, and then I found out that you could do service band, which was kind of this bullshit alternative that if you happened to play an instrument, which I did at the time, you could join the service band, and once a fortnight, rather than sitting on a field yelling at people, you were actually able to just go and play music in a room with a bunch of tuba players and shit.
Yeah, okay. So did you actually do that?
I did that, yeah. And while everyone else was away on camp, which was something that I hated, our only responsibility was to go to some old people's home, in North Sydney and play some music to them that they couldn't hear anyway.
But that sounded more fun to you than playing the sport, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, anything to do with sport or, military wasn't up my alley.
Were you a good student academically?
No, not really. I mean, I was okay, but I could have been way better than I was.
Yeah. You weren't a standout or anything?
No, definitely not. Yeah. But also, I was one of those, didn't apply myself whatsoever. Spent too much time probably smoking joints and playing guitar and not enough doing actual school work. Yeah. But notwithstanding, I got into a reasonable university degree at Sydney doing science and psychology.
Yeah.
And I was doing that for about 6 months and working at a pub in Balmain. I lived in Balmain.
Yeah.
And this was 2000 and 2001. So this was the era that you could work in a pub, still go to uni and pay rent on an apartment at the same time.
Yeah.
Those days
are long gone.
Those days are long gone, right? So I was living on my own, and about 6 months in, I remember going to uni one day and I started to feel really sick, like I had a flu or something. And I sent myself home on the bus, and I was back to my 1-bedroom apartment, so I didn't have anyone there, and I just thought I'd put myself to bed and see if I felt better the next day. And I remember texting my stepsister and saying, hey, I'm feeling a bit sick. And she's like, oh, do you want me to take you to a doctor? And I was like, no, that's an overreaction, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm a 19-year-old boy. Everything's fine.
Of course. I mean, even I know 50-year-old blokes that have the same reaction. You could have a hole in your foot and you're like, no, I'm fine.
It's just a flesh wound. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I had the worst night of my life, quite literally, such that I was waking up in cold and hot sweats. I was feeling nauseous. I couldn't walk. So I was crawling from my bedroom to the ensuite bathroom to throw up, and then I would crawl back. And then at one time I was feeling freezing cold, and so I decided to get into the shower and put hot water on myself, but then I passed out.
Fuck. I mean, surely at the point where you're having to crawl to the bathroom, you're like, okay, I'm properly fucked here.
Yeah. Maybe a doctor. I don't know.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I was, because at this point it's like 2 a.m. as well. I'm not going anywhere. Right?
Yeah.
So... And once or twice I'd had a bad flu before, and it was kind of like that, but much worse. And I was maybe this is what being an adult is like. So anyway, woke up the next morning, and I was really, really bad. And so I decided to text Fran, my stepsister, and I said, "Hey, look, maybe I should see a doctor. This is pretty bad." To her credit, she dropped everything she was doing and came straight over to pick me up. And in the time that she took to come to my place, which would have been a 20-minute drive or something, I spent almost all of that time trying to get my shoes on.
Fuck.
Because my feet had swollen up to like twice their size.
Holy shit.
Yeah, which was strange. I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
And then by the time she got to my door, she looked like she'd seen a ghost, because I was all pale and white, but I had a purple rash impinging upon my skin. And so she was like, I'm taking you to a hospital. That's it. And I said, well, let's just go to a doctor first. And she's like, no.
Yeah.
So she dragged me down this. I remember I lived at this really crap apartment that had this really steep driveway in Balmain. And she's like half my size and weight and dragged me down this driveway, which I can't still imagine happening. And she took me up to Balmain Hospital. And they looked at me the same way she looked at me. And I remember thinking, I really want people to stop looking at me like that. But you know when you get to like an emergency department and it's usually, you know, you get there and it's like, give us your name and your date of birth and a list of everyone you've ever fucked and then sit over there for 3 hours and think about what you've done. So I skipped all of that shit, right?
Yes.
They were just like, oh, okay, we're getting you into a room right now.
So sometimes you sit in those wards and you think, oh, no one here looks that bad, but they must have seen you and go, okay, this guy's fucked. He needs to be fast-tracked.
That was my first fast track. I get a lot of fast tracks now to airports and things like that, but that was my first one.
Yeah.
They're like, come into the room.
Fuck.
So they bring me into this room and there's these nurses that start stripping off my clothes, and I remember saying something to them like, oh, in any other situation, this might be someone's fantasy. But they didn't seem too impressed by that. So they kind of laid me down and they were sticking
You're cracking
needles
jokes and they're like, this is not the time.
Well, I'm trying, right? I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
And they're sticking needles into me and shit like that. And then they said to me basically, we're not equipped to deal with this. We're sending you to RPA. And so I got into an ambulance and I was just shipped off to RPA. How
do you feel when a hospital is saying, we need to send you to another hospital because like this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't remember how I felt hearing that.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that stuck with me, surely, because otherwise I would be able to recall it, but I can't. I think at the time, you know, there was a strong sense from me that they were overreacting to something.
Sure.
They were probably underreacting, if anything.
Fuck.
Because I'd contracted meningococcal disease.
Yeah.
Which can be and is deadly. And the upshot of it is it causes septicemia, which is a blood poisoning. And once that's gone too far, it causes gangrene. And usually that starts with your extremities, so hands and feet.
Yep. So that was the reason for the swelling of the feet. Do they know
Yeah,
much
that's
about
right.
how you contract it?
No, they don't. Yeah. It's contracted, I guess, kind of like COVID, right? It's like saliva. So they used to say things like, well, if you share drinks with people, if you share a cigarette or something like that, you can get it. If someone coughs on you into your mouth, you could probably get it, I guess.
But just such a behavior that everyone is doing, right? People share drinks, they're coughing on each other. Like it's,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's just that kind of stuff. So that didn't really bother me at that point. It still doesn't bother me today.
Yeah.
I don't care where I got it.
Yeah.
Because what are you going to do? Blame someone? Come on.
Yeah.
But anyway, I got shipped off to RPA, and that started my really long stint in hospital. I was in hospital for 18 months after that. So I was in RPA for a month on life support and in a coma for a couple of weeks. And then I was shipped off to Concord because they treat how it affects your skin like burns. And Concord has the best burns unit in the country.
Yeah.
And so they shipped me off to the burns unit. I was there for 4.5 months, and they did all my amputations. So legs first, 6 inches below the knee. And then a few weeks after that, arms at the elbow.
So sorry, what was the time frame between first arriving at Balmain Hospital and then the amputations?
I would say 6 to 8 weeks or something like that. So there was a couple of weeks in a coma at RPA that was induced.
Yep.
And then there was a couple of weeks while they were deciding what to do with me. And then moved off to Concord. They pretty much told me that legs had to go immediately. A couple of weeks after that, they're trying to save my arms. And that was a big one for me because not only is it such a big loss of independence, it's not like legs, which is, you know, you can either be in a wheelchair or get prosthetics or something like that. But losing your arms is a huge loss of independence. And so... and also, you know, I was a guitarist, so that part of my life was going to be removed forever, or so I thought at the time. You know?
Yeah. So you're saying when you got told that you were going to lose your legs, that you could swallow that pill a lot easier than losing your hands.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I'm not sure whether it was a combination of that, but also the cocktail of drugs they had me on at the time, because I would have been on a lot.
Yeah.
But I felt it was far easier to accept the losing of the legs because. You know, it's posed as this kind of, this is going to save your life thing at that point, you're kind of like, okay. And then I remember the couple of weeks after that were so tough, not just mentally, but physically, so much pain that when the doctor told me we had to lose the arms for me to live, it was a bit, I had to pause for a second to make that decision.
Yeah, what do you mean by you had to pause?
Well, I think, in retrospect, I paused for a different reason than it sounds like, but he said to me, he said, you have two options. You can either lose your arms and then, move on with prosthetics, or you can not do that. The catch is you'll die.
Yeah, fine.
Right? So it's an ultimatum. It's not really a choice.
No.
But interestingly, at the time, it felt like the first time I ever had control over anything.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that's why I savored the moment for a while, because even if I'd wanted to kill myself up to that point, I didn't have the means of doing it.
Yep.
So you're very much at the behest.
Even though it was a shit choice, it just felt nice to have any choice at all for a second.
That's right. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
But obviously I made the choice to amputate them and move on.
Yep.
And then the latter the latter year of being in hospital was all spent at this rehab hospital out that doesn't exist anymore, called Prince Henry, and it was previously an infectious diseases hospital around the turn of the last century, but it'd been largely shut down except for two Nightingale wards. The whole place looked like fucking Shutter Island. It's interestingly, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was food, because our hospital was across the road from Long Bay Jail, and we posited that possibly the only difference between the two institutions is that they got better food than we did.
I would say you're probably right.
Yeah.
As someone who's eaten the food there, I found it was not too bad in jail.
Well, I'll tell you something. The food at Prince Henry was the worst food I've ever had. I don't even know if it is food. Like, I'll give you a small anecdote, right? So because that hospital was largely shut down and dilapidated, there was a lot of local flora and fauna that had just taken over, and there was a bunch of stray cats that lived presumably underneath one of the buildings, and we sometimes used to feed them. And often a lot of the hospital food that we would feed the cats, they didn't identify as food. Like, they wouldn't even sniff it. Like, there was this one dish called, as Swedish meatballs, they called it, by name only perhaps, right? These things were like hockey pucks or something. They were so hard you couldn't penetrate them with a knife.
Far out.
They were usually black, and then we would try and give them to the cats, and the cats would just regard them as sundry, like, miscellaneous objects.
But virtually inedible.
It would just be like, laser printed cartridge shopping bag Swedish meatball. Not, this is an edible piece of food.
You knew there was bad food in jail when, when guys tried to give it away and no one wanted it. Like,
right.
One's like a fish lentil curry and like a vegetarian frittata. There were days when you couldn't, but when no one was giving away anything. When you had like a pizza pack or beef burgers or something like that.
What's a pizza pack?
You get like a tortilla,
yeah,
and you get some like pepperoni slices and tomato, and so you just put some margarine on it, and then it's got cheese. It's got like cheese
pre-shredded mozzarella that has that anti-coagulating agent in it, so it doesn't melt properly. Fucking.
So you put so you'd have like in your buy up, you could buy like various grocery items for yourself. I'd have like tomato sauce and barbecue sauce. So I'd put the butter on the tortilla, and then I'd put the cheese and the pepperoni, and then some drizzle with some sauce, and you put it through the conveyor toaster, and next thing you know, you got a pizza, and so that's
you?
Pizza-ish, It's
okay. If you had the option of eating one of those pizzas again, or one of the dog pizzas that you used to make, what would it be?
Well, that's a good question. I think I'd still go with the prison pizza.
Oh, really?
Because it was a larger serving.
Because it's a larger serving. Is that the only criteria?
Well, also with the dog pizzas, we used a sweet potato mash as the base. Because dogs, they shouldn't have too much. There was too much sodium in the regular pizza sauce for dogs.
Okay, yeah.
So we try to make them like nutritionally improved for dogs. So it was like a sweet potato mash base, and then like chicken breast or kangaroo bacon that we used on them. We did. They were still human. It was still human grade food.
Yeah,
but I think I'd still go with I'm a pepperoni lover, so.
And what did you put the base? Is it just the same as you use for a normal pizza?
No, it's like it was like a smaller flour tortilla.
Okay, so it's a tortilla. Yeah.
Yes. And
did you ever try using corn tortillas for that?
I don't recall. I don't think so.
My dog really likes corn tortillas. Yeah, yeah.
We found pretty much all dogs loved the pizzas.
Yeah.
You know, we had so many photos on social media of just people coming for their dog's birthday, or just coming. Sometimes there'd be 6 people sitting there with 10 dogs, and they'd spend like $100 on the human menu and $150 on the dog menu.
Yeah.
And I was
Amazing.
yes.
That's great. And they can't review you, so it's a perfect crime.
Well, a guy did. We had to change on Uber Eats because we had the dog pizzas listed for sale, and I had to add dog pizzas designed for dogs, not humans, because a guy ordered the dog pizzas, ate them, and then gave us a 3-star review. And I was like, 3 stars feel pretty good.
Yeah, actually,
like 3 stars because they're small, right? They're not they're like this big. So a guy that orders that, it has a sweet potato mash base, and then he ate that. He's like, oh, it's a 6 out of 10.
So, but do you test them when you made them? Were you eating them to test them, or?
I ate them just as like they were fine, but like nowhere near as good as like a gourmet human pizza that we're cooking up.
Because the test would be if you had the dog pizza, but what you would give to the dog, and then you add salt to it because they obviously can't have as much salt. Is that right?
Yep.
And then you would get an idea of maybe how they would react to it.
Well, I mean, I'm not that excited by a sweet potato mash base compared to a tomato sauce base or a barbecue base, right? with 4 different meats on it or something like that, So they weren't designed for someone to be like, oh, I'm going to save a few dollars and get the dog pizza because it still sounds good. It was supposed to be a good doggo treat.
But I mean, at the same time, they have to put that label on. You ever buy cans of dog food, which I don't typically, but you read on it, this is a pet food only. Yeah. Which is concerning. Yes. We have to communicate that to the public.
Well, you underestimate how silly people can be. I had to add, I thought dog menu was enough to be like, oh, this menu's for dogs.
Yeah.
Turns out that's not enough. Designed for dogs, not humans. I had to add in. So... yes, but
sorry,
that's all right. We're always keen to go down a rabbit hole on this podcast. Yeah. So the food was shit. And so at this point, did you have prosthetics hands at this point?
Not yet. Yeah. Okay. So the rehab hospital was for getting prosthetics and learning how to use them. Okay. The problem that I had was a lot of my skin was open wounds still, because the way the meningococcal affects you is, all the scarring on my face that you see, and for those who are listening and not watching. It's a bit of a Freddy Krueger vibe going on, but that's all from the meningococcal septicemia. And so I had those at the end of my legs as well, and bits on my arms. And so it's hard to get prosthetics on there and start using them when you've got open wounds, because they can make them worse.
Of course. And were you in a lot of pain?
Yeah, I was in quite a lot of pain. I was not as much pain as I was in Concord, because I had wound dressing changes there that are... if you have an experience of 0 to 10 pain levels in your life, which let's say I did before, this would hit 100 or 120. It's the kind of pain that you didn't know existed until it happened.
Man.
And so I was somewhat on the other side of that. And so comparatively, I wasn't in as much pain as that. But it was still painful to walk. Obviously, getting up on 2 prosthetic legs, I haven't borne weight. I haven't even been upright for 6 months. And so it took longer than it normally does, I think, on average for people using prosthetics, particularly with the walking.
Were there anyone else around you in this rehab facility that also had meningococcal, or was it
I don't think there was anyone in the state that had meningococcal. It's not a very common thing.
Yeah.
So I know there were a few people that got it around the time. But there are varying degrees of severity, right? So if you catch it early enough, you can make a full recovery. If you catch it too late, it'll kill you.
Yep.
And so I'm sort of in the Goldilocks zone where it produces DJs.
Threading the needle on that one, It's very small.
Lucky
crew.
It's scarce, or I'd be out of a job.
We've already got a DJ Hookie on tonight, mate. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. But yeah, so no, I didn't have anybody everyone that was in my ward in Prince Henry Hospital, it was a rehab ward.
Yep.
And so it was predominantly older people who'd lost legs to diabetes or things like that. And then there was another ward that was open that was the spinal ward, and that's where all the fun people were. because that's where all the younger kids that were my age who'd broken their backs doing stupid shit, like jumping off cliffs and things. But that kind of made them interesting people. And so I spent a lot of time with them. And they were, around my age. Yep. And so I made quite a few friends while I was there. And I'll tell you an interesting story once, actually. This was when it was kind of later in the piece, and I'd been walking for a bit. So it was towards the end of my stint, but I'd made a few friends there. And three of them were in wheelchairs. There was one guy that was a paraplegic, so he could use his hands. He used to be a mechanic. And there was another guy who was just 18 years old, this kid, and he was quadriplegic. But they put him in a what I call a super expensive wheelchair because it used to go at like 20 kilometers an hour. This thing, it was crazy, right?
Yeah.
It was borderline malpractice to put him in this thing because it was like he's going to go fast, so you put him on the highway. And then there was another guy who was a paraplegic and he was in a wheelchair, but he'd lost one leg, and he used to be an ex-BMX rider, and so he was obsessed with doing like tricks on his wheelchair, like jumping off walls and things like that.
Some of those guys you just can't stop.
Yeah, crazy, right? Yeah. It was amazing. So those three guys. And then there was one other guy who I met one night who he looked able-bodied just like you, but he was a quadriplegic from the neck down in the sense that he just couldn't feel anything. So he could operate, but he had no sensation. So he was always at risk of like stepping on broken glass or things like that might cut his foot.
Wait, so he could move his body, but he just couldn't feel it.
He couldn't feel anything from the neck down. I'd never heard about this before.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah. And so we were all hanging out together one night. So it was the mechanic, the super expensive wheelchair guy, ex-BMX guy, and the other guy who I call Captain Upright just to sort of preserve his privacy. And we were drinking, on the balcony of the ward, and someone said, I forget who suggested it, they're like, let's go and break into one of the abandoned wards. And we're all pretty drunk. So we're like, yeah, that sounds like a fucking great idea. So it was only Captain Upright and I that were standing and walking, and the other guys were in chairs. And so we broke into this abandoned ward. The mechanic actually grabbed a piece of metal and like jimmied the lock from the outside and burst us into the place. And we were just sort of checking it out. It looked like Shutter Island. You know what I mean? There were like dubious rooms that looked like they could have been used for electric shock treatment and things.
Also, this would have like visually looked like the funniest Motley Crew storming in there.
Imagine it, right? Yeah. And so and at one point, I think, the ex-BMX guy found the fire hose and turned it on. It was just, we needed to get out of there.
Just lads being lads.
Yeah. And so, but what happened was the doors had actually shut behind us and locked us in. So we're actually locked into this ward.
Fuck.
And so somebody noticed that because there were Nightingale wards, what you'd have is you'd have the main ward and then you'd have sort of a veranda-y type thing. And then there was like a balcony outside that. And we identified that we could probably get out via that way, but the veranda type area was littered with all of this shit on the floor, and the stairs leading out to the balcony had perished.
Fuck.
Over time. And so I remember thinking to myself, okay, let's break down the problem here. And the the super expensive wheelchair guy said, to hell with breaking down the problem, let's just break down the door. And so he went at full pelt at this door between the ward and the veranda, and he smashed it open, right? And the ex-BMX guy actually said, he's like, I know that those stairs have perished, but I can actually make a jump and get down there. But he can't get through because there's a double doors that had one of those latches up really high, which I couldn't reach, right? But the Captain Upright guy could definitely reach it. He was like 6'5". This guy was a big guy, Islander dude. And he said, but I don't want to walk through all of that stuff because I'm going to cut my foot on something. There's all sorts of shit on the floor, syringes and broken glass. Yeah. And I thought, that's where I come in, right?
Yeah.
If I step on broken glass, no one's going to give a shit. Like nothing's going to happen. So I went into the veranda and I sort of cleared this path with my feet for Captain Upright. And then he followed me like just right behind me like a conga line of stupidity. He gets to the door, unlatches the door. We go back through. We let through ex-BMX. He rolls out. And then he makes this jump off the edge of the veranda over the perished steps onto the ground, and then is able to go back around and unlock us using the little piece of metal that the mechanic had Jimmy the.
It sounds like the disability version of Marvel that everyone had these complementary superpowers.
That's right. I thought of it as like I'm in Adam Smith's pin factory and I'm understanding how the division of labor is finally working. You know,
Everyone had something to bring to the
everyone
table
had something
that
to
was
do.
different.
Yeah. But it's interesting, right? Because the way you think about it, you kind of like you can use certain people's skills that they develop for very specific things.
Yeah.
And often society doesn't think about it that way. They're kind of like, let's put a square peg in a round hole. Whereas I think some of the best ways of doing it are find out what you do really well and then get even better at doing it. You know?
Specialize in that. Yeah. At this stage during the rehab, what was your mental state like? Had you I imagine it's quite a process to just start to accept the new normal, or the way your life has changed. From it's only a few months ago, you were at uni at the start of a life that you were kind of starting to picture where that was going to unfold to. Yeah,
I mean, look, it was not really getting used to a new reality. It was getting used to an ever evolving reality.
Yeah, okay.
Because from month to month, the trajectory of what you think is going to happen would change. And so you actually learn to forget about what you think is going to happen.
Yeah. And
you just allow things to happen to you. And your immediate future becomes far more malleable. And it's one of the reasons that I don't like to set myself too many long-term goals because there are too many people with their finger in the pie that can change that on you.
Yep.
And that can become disheartening. And I much rather prefer to sort of go with the flow and take opportunities as they come. And, having that future that is not certain is far more exciting. Because I think if I was one of those people that, I know exactly where I'm going to be 5 years from now, my 5-year plan, I'd probably bore myself to death.
Yep, that's fair. So you were able to think about that in those terms because it was ever evolving, but it sounds like you still have a level of optimism to you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm way more optimistic than I should be.
Where do you think that comes from?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been asked that a few times, and I think, look, you can't discount the fact that there might be some precursory hereditary aspect to one's ability to be positive in the face of adversity.
Mm-hmm.
But the more adversity you experience, the better you get at dealing with it. I know that.
Yep.
And so it's probably a combination of the two, if I'm being honest, and a lot of luck, this happening to me in a country where I was supported by a medical system and also was lucky enough to have friends and family to support me through it, which are opportunities that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's not something that I can take credit for.
I had a similar experience in prison where I had just like a ongoing series of setbacks of things. Whenever I got my hopes up about something, they got dashed, and it really started to stop me from looking forward or getting my hopes up about things, I guess. But they didn't. I wouldn't say that was the same thing as killing my optimism. I think it just made me just start to be more realistic about the things that I was optimistic about.
So you were able to manage your expectations better.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
because my ideas about thinking I was going to get out within a couple of weeks were dashed. Just my family visits got cancelled because of COVID and all these kinds of things. And then when I started to just think about I still had my health. I was still having a laugh with other guys in there. There were just all these other things that were okay that I was able to say to myself, okay, it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
Let's just celebrate the things that you still do have.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, focusing on what you have versus what you don't have, and also what you can control and what you can't control.
Yeah.
Like getting upset about things that you can't control is largely futile. And I know it's like an instinctual response that we all have, but the better that you get at not caring about those things and focusing on what you do control, it's a skill that you develop such that you get better at that in an exponential way. Also, you touched on that managing expectations. That's an interesting concept that I always like to talk about, which is that there's a balance with it, right? Because it's not that you want to have expectations that are too high, but you also don't want to have expectations that are too low.
Yeah.
Because there's a thing called the nocebo effect. Do you know about this?
No.
It's the inverse to the placebo effect, which I'm sure you're familiar with,
yes.
right? and it's that, the nocebo effect means that when you have low expectations of outcomes, you act in a way that would see that those outcomes wouldn't actually come to pass.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, a classic example might be if you're up for a promotion at work or something like that, but you don't believe that you'll get it, you'll act in such a way that you definitely won't get it.
Yep.
So finding that balance between positive and negative with expectations, being open to good things happening, but not disappointed when they don't, is a really important balance to strike.
There's a guy I had on a couple of weeks ago, Brett Kennellan, who got bitten on his leg by a shark, and he was talking about the fact that he had doctors tell him, like, you'll never surf again, or you won't be able to, like, do running or all these kind of things. And he does all these things now. And so he was saying, similar to that, sometimes doctors can do someone a disservice when they say, these are the things you're not going to be able to do, because then people can believe that because they're hearing it from a medical professional and never really...
being definitive about anything is really probably not great.
Yeah, they think, that they're protecting someone by saying, hey, like, don't get your hopes up.
Yeah.
But,
and I'm sure for some people, that would be a great motivator.
Absolutely.
And I've seen it before. Oh, you'll never walk again, but then they make it their business
They say,
to do
I'll
that.
show you, motherfucker.
Yeah.
But, exactly. For me, I'd be the same. I'd be like, that's a red rag to a bull. I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
But there are some other people that say, oh, okay, well, that's limited my beliefs about what I can do.
Yeah. Yeah, so having a sort of catch-all attitude towards patients like that, you'd probably just have to err on the side of, well, it's not impossible, but it would be really difficult, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool because, you're right. That you can set your expectations, but you still want to be able to dare to dream, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Like I think now I have these big dreams for what I'd like to be able to do with comedy, but it all starts with just realistic steps. It's like, what can I do in the next 12 months?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's realistic.
Yeah, and that kind of harks back to the goal setting stuff as well, which is that if you for your comedy had an idea of where you want to be in 5 years, it might make you too myopic in a way to not see opportunities presented to you when they are. And that's why I always like to be kind of, agile in a way that, somebody might steer you down a completely separate path you didn't know was amazing for you. And you need to be open to those things.
I couldn't agree more because there's so many times where I have done gigs where another door has opened, whether it's a media interview or a podcast or doing another gig or all these other kinds of opportunities have all come from just deciding to do that one shit gig that I was like, oh fuck, what am I even doing? It's going to be 20 people, 15 people, but then the next door opens, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it just reminds you, like, this is all part of a process.
Yes.
And
you don't know where those paths are going to lead. Actually, that's a good segue for what happened to me after hospital.
Yeah.
Which was that I eventually got out and I had 2 prosthetics and arms and 2 prosthetic legs. And by the time I started living independently again, I wanted to conquer playing the guitar again with the hooks.
Yes.
And so
sorry, you had the hooks at this stage?
I had the hooks at this point. So
yeah.
This is out of hospital now.
So I think I read somewhere that the hooks weren't the first prosthetic that you had.
Yeah, that's right. They gave me hands.
Yeah.
Well, they kind of looked a bit like hands.
Yeah.
But also they looked largely shit.
Yeah.
So imagine your hand like that if you were picking up a chess piece.
Yeah.
Exactly that. That's what they look like, and that's how much they open, like a pinch.
Yeah, okay.
So good for giving someone a nipple cripple. That's about it.
Yeah.
They're pretty useless. They're quite heavy. They're really cumbersome.
And functional wise, they weren't that functional?
No. Yeah, not really. Not for me anyway. I'm sure people get a kick out of it, but I think they're largely crap.
So at one point you tested the hands and you're like, what else have you got?
No. She'd sort of given me the options already. The occupational therapist at that point. And I didn't, when I looked at this hook, I remember thinking, how do you do anything with that? But as soon as I put it on, it was really lightweight and I realized how to open it. And then I started picking stuff up and I'm like, oh, this is
way better,
far superior. I could hold a glass and I could hold a cigarette. So I was like, all right.
Tick, tick.
Yeah. They're my first 2.
And you said that they're obviously lighter.
Yeah, they're lighter. Yeah.
So that would have been. It just would have. I felt that just much.
They're just
less
much
cumbersome.
easier to use, and I really like lightweight tech.
Yep.
I like to travel light. I don't like too much junk.
Yep.
And lightweight technology has always been something that I favor, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, did you have a follow up?
No, go ahead. So you've got the hooks and you're revisiting the guitar.
Yeah. So what I did was I started designing adaptations for my hooks that would enable me to play the guitar, and a lot of them were sort of pie in the sky. A lot of them were just really bad designs. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a designer at all.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm just using my working knowledge of the guitar to think, okay, well, maybe I can have something that would play like a power chord, but it's like a stamp. And then I can use that on a guitar. But then the further I go up the fretboard, the distance between the frets gets smaller. And so I wouldn't be able to do that all the way up.
Yeah.
And then I realized that if I just open tuned the guitar, I wouldn't need that imprint and I would need just a stick that went across it. And I realized what I was basically designing was a slide. And so I went and found a guitar engineer and I got him to design what I'd drawn. And he did like a pick holder in the right hook. And then I just converted my Stratocaster to like a lap steel, raised the action and put some flat wound strings on it. By the first time I saw it, I could play it instantly because I already had the knowledge of playing the guitar. It was just getting around the physicality of it.
Wow.
And so I was instantly back playing the guitar again.
Holy shit.
But the interesting thing is not the physicality of playing the guitar with hooks. It was what it did for me mentally because first of all, I had my creative outlet back.
Yep.
Secondly, I had overcome something that was so ridiculous that all of my concerns that I had when I was younger about writing original music and playing in front of people and making a band, all of those self-conscious thoughts seemed to pale in comparison to what I'd overcome.
Yeah.
And so I did that. I started a band, with a couple of friends and we produced music and we went on tours and things like that. And, coming back to what you were saying about you never know where a path will take you.
Yeah.
Doing that band, and it was not a very good band, right? It was pretty crap.
But it must have felt awesome to be back in a band.
It felt awesome to be back in a band and be making music and have a creative outlet. But it also introduced me to a lot of people who worked in nightclubs because we would play in nightclubs.
Yeah.
And so towards the end of my music business course, I had to do some work experience. So that's where I went. I went to a club in the Cross. And I was like, I just asked the guy, I was like, hey, you know me from playing, in that band thing, will you give me some work experience helping out at the club? So he gave me work experience at Candy's apartment on Bayswater Road. And this would have been back in, I think, end of 2005 or 2006.
Back when the Cross was just absolutely heaving.
Yeah, that's right. In its glory days, I guess. And I did a pretty good job of running their Thursday night parties. And then Chris and I, he was my band member, but he's also my closest friend, had talked about how we should do that together, but our own night, because we weren't getting any remuneration for doing that from Candy's. And it was just, I guess it was a lucky timing that we'd been looking for places to do something like that. And I got a call from the owner of Club 77, who said, we just had our Saturday night party promoter leave. She's moving to Melbourne. Do you want to have a crack at, doing it for a couple of months? And I was like, yeah. So we did it for 15 years.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
That's
and so that was actually how I made myself a DJ, was that we started the club first and then I put myself on. Chris and I both played. He actually DJ'd a couple of times before, or more than a couple of times. He had a bit of experience. Not as like a proper DJ, but sort of just song after song kind of DJ.
Yeah.
And that's all I ever intended to be, because it was just filling up space in the night. But I thought to myself, like, having worked at Candy's, I was like, there were all these DJs that kept emailing and wanting gigs that I was having to filter through. And they're like spending months learning how to DJ. They're buying all this equipment and they're doing mixtapes and they're sending emails and please put me on, for $50 in a craft single or like 8 p.m. slot or whatever it is. And I thought to myself at the time, I was like, there's got to be a better way to become a DJ than this. And so we did that. We just started a club and we made the club popular based on different contexts. Like we used to do theme parties and we did outlandish advertising and we scheduled all the music and the people that worked there and the drinks and people came for the party, not for the DJs. But then we just sort of slot ourselves in like this musical Trojan horse type thing.
Yep. So your advice to up-and-coming DJs would be to start as a promoter, right?
Well, not necessarily, because my advice to up-and-coming DJs is just do something that everyone else isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty handy when you're running the room. You can just chuck yourself in, and then I mean, even if you go poorly, no one.
I think that actually became a quite a well-worn path since we did it in 2006. There weren't that many people doing that before, but a lot of people started doing that afterwards. So just do something different. I guess, yeah.
And that was Saturday nights that you were running.
Yeah, Saturday nights at Club 77, and we were there for like 8 years.
Yeah,
I mean, after about 6 months, I actually became an okay DJ. And then after a couple of years, we actually got pretty good.
I mean, I grew up in Sydney. I know like Club 77 was revered back in the day as being like one of the biggest clubs in Sydney.
Yeah. You might have even found yourself down there one Saturday night at 3 o'clock in the morning.
I'm sure I did.
Yeah.
I don't remember you DJing, but I mean, I was usually like very...
That means you either had a really good time.
I was usually very munted on pingers. So that was also the heyday of really good ecstasy in Sydney.
Yeah,
so
it was, definitely, It was everywhere. Probably is now. I wouldn't know, but like,
I mean, I don't know. Usually, I think ecstasy kind of died in the arse since like now, like MDMA just seemed to take over from that.
Right.
But
I was always more of a hallucinogens person.
Yeah, right.
I liked hallucinogens.
Oh, well, it's weird that we didn't cross paths then, because that was my my areas of specialty.
Well, when you're a DJ, you don't have to buy anything. So
True. Another one of the perks.
Yeah.
So it started for you as you just DJing because you could, and then your skills kind of just intuitively picked up from there. Yeah,
you learn quickly when you're thrown in the deep end.
Yeah,
I think that's true of most things.
Yeah,
and so playing my first set to 500 people was nerve-wracking in the beginning, and for the first, I'd say 30 seconds.
Yep.
Until you realize how little people give a shit.
Yes.
About what you're doing.
And as long as the music's pumping, they don't care. They're not going, oh, I don't know about that transition.
Yeah, exactly. No one gives a shit. So, yeah.
I mean, you've just made me remember just the awesome part I read from your book, which is coming out, which is the epilogue, which must have been one of the first times that you were DJing at Club 77.
Yes.
Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the reason I chose that as a prologue was because it was a bit of a taste of what things became at the end. Because I think a lot of the time when you pick up a book written by someone like me, you probably make a bunch of assumptions about what's going to be in it, and that's exists there to kind of set the reader straight that it might be a bit more unexpected than you're expecting.
Yep.
And it was a night, I think, was probably a few months into running the club or something like that, and we did a party called Masquerade, which is a masquerade ball, but a rave style thing. Thanks, that's a good name, right?
Yeah, fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's nice of you to say. But I hadn't DJed that much, and I was still a little bit apprehensive about playing it in really packed nights.
Yeah,
and I was trying to hold a line outside of people trying to get into the club, and we were already over capacity. And I had a friend come up and put a tab of acid on my tongue, and I was just like,
"Good friend."
Oh yeah, good friend. Yeah. And I was just like, I wasn't planning on wanting that, but then when it was there, I was like, let's see how this goes. And so I had to sort of amble through these sweaty masses of people, just complete sardine style nightclub. And that's when I ran into the guy at the bar. I remember you could smoke it. Maybe you could smoke at nightclubs, maybe you couldn't, but I was smoking. I smoked cigarettes.
I think that was back before they changed the smoking laws. Yeah,
I was definitely doing it when you couldn't, but I think you could in 2006.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to the bar to get a drink before my set, and I used to flick a cigarette packet up and then pull it out with my teeth. And there was a guy next to me who didn't know who I was, obviously, and he's like, "Oh, that's amazing." And I was like, "Yeah, like I'm used to things that I do with my hooks, so it's not that amazing to me."
Yes, of course. This is your everyday life, right?
Yeah, this is what I do. I'm like, all right. And the guy asked me, he's like, "Oh, so what happened to you?" And I often make up bullshit stories, particularly in nightclubs when I don't want to have the medical conversation with somebody, and they don't either, if they're being honest,
Yeah.
And so I told him I was in a trapeze accident where someone was holding my arms and then someone grabbed my legs and just ripped me apart. And He loved it. He was,
of course.
Was wide-eyed.
Oh
He's
my
like,
God, bro.
And he would have gone back to his friends and be like, you never know what I just fucking met. You know? So yeah, I still contend we both left with better stories that night than if I'd told the truth.
Yeah.
And then I had to DJ, and I'd kind of in my state where the acid was coming on, like I was a little bit more paranoid and apprehensive about how my set was going to go and what I was going to do.
I'd be if I was tripping balls.
And it was kind of like, you're in this dark nightclub and there's 2 decks in front of you and they're all lit up by colored LEDs, and those start to sort of float a bit in 3-dimensional space, such that you don't really know what to press.
Or I'd be tripping. I'd be like, well, all the colors would blur. Yeah. So
And,
you made it hard for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my friend made it hard for me. I can't blame him. I love him. But anyway, so but Chris was great. He was like, look, you know how to do this. It's fine. He's like, just press this one, press that one. Like, this is not a dead mouse set. You know what I mean? Play a few rock songs or whatever it is and just shut up. Right? I'm like, okay, fine. So I get up there, I start playing, and it was amazing. Like, everything was perfect. I probably thought that it was going better than it was at the time, but the crowd was responding perfectly to it. And so all of that apprehension just seemed to peter out to an extent, and I was just enjoying what I have always enjoyed about DJing, which isn't as much the performative aspect, but just the fact that it's the only time in the night where you're alone. Get hassled by people.
Yeah, that's cool. I never thought about that part of it. Yeah,
it's just you and listening to music. That's it. There's no like shit conversations about rental prices with some guy at the bar, or whatever it is.
Wow. Okay, so that's the only place you get a bit of peace.
That's the only place you get peace. Yeah, and just the one thing that I remembered so vividly from that night was, how usually when there's a DJ and like someone will go and try and give them a high five or shake hands with them or something, and our DJ booth was a bit elevated at the time, and I remember this guy, and I was really early in the club scene, so no one really knew who I was, and some guy extends his hand up to like shake my hand, and I was just like, oh yeah, and I just slapped it with the hook, and his face was just like,
oh my God.
He's having
I mean, you say that the performative aspect, you kind of downplayed that, but I saw some of the pictures of you on your Instagram where like you've been DJing and like obviously like a massive beat has just dropped and you're just there with both hooks up and the crowd's going nuts. And I'm like,
I didn't say I wasn't good at it.
You look like an absolute rock god. And I'm like, this looks awesome.
You gotta, because what else are you doing? Like that's what DJs like. You're pressing play and then you're beat mixing something. Unless you're one of those annoying people that uses the filter too much, you got to do something to sort of get the crowd a bit more interactive.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, the conversation that you have with the crowd when you're DJing is very much a momentum building experience.
Yeah.
Where the more excited you are to be there, the better they're going to respond, and then the better you're going to play.
Yeah.
And that becomes a positive feedback loop. So when you see those DJs that are kind of just like looking down and doing technical shit and the crowd's just like, should we leave?
It's the exact same with comedy. The more an audience is laughing and is into it, the better the performance becomes.
Exactly. Positive feedback loop. Yeah. So you got to, sometimes it's your responsibility to generate, the spark or the kernel of that positive feedback.
Totally.
Loop. Yeah.
So how often do you DJ now?
So Starfuckers, which is the club that we started, ended in a weekly capacity in about, I think, 2018 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just do periodical parties, which are like our big theme parties. So we do one for Mardi Gras, we do one for Halloween. And so we still do those ones. And then occasionally we DJ at other places. We've done Ministry of Sound for the past couple of years. They do like an annual event and then smaller gigs around the city from time to time. But not a hell of a lot these days.
Yeah, it's more just something that you do for fun more than being a money spinner.
Which is so much better. I can't tell you how much more I enjoy DJing now than I did when it was work.
Yeah, okay. Why is that, do you think?
Well, it's like all those bullshit artists that are like, follow your passion.
Yeah.
Don't do that. It's a stupid idea because you'll ruin your passion. You'll ruin it real quick. As soon as you rely on it for income,
I saw there's a comedian, Reese Nicholson, who I saw not too long ago talk about that on stage, saying like, I love what I do, but I still like, if I won the lottery, like I wouldn't do it.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. I always have taken the opinion, like, find something that you're good at good at and then try to enjoy a facet of it or doing it to some extent, or something that you don't mind doing and get good at doing that or something.
Yep.
But if you do something that you truly love, and I don't actually believe I've ever had a passion for anything, because I'm one of those people that has fleeting interests in things.
Yep.
So I'll spend 3 years researching everything about astronomy, and then I just won't read it anymore. Or I'll get into photography for like 2 years, and I'll know everything about photography, and then I just won't take any photos.
Wow.
So I like learning little bits about things and having a more of a rich tapestry of knowledge of life than spending a whole career doing one thing.
Sure, but the interest in music seems to have been pretty ongoing.
It's an interest in having a creative outlet.
Yeah.
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 But obviously, like, it was running parties and DJing was something that we happened to be good at, and we didn't hate. We liked doing it.
Yep.
I wouldn't call it a passion.
Yep.
But it's a good way to make a crust.
I feel with comedy, I know that I don't love every gig, but I know that to do the ones I love, I have to do the ones you don't love as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And because sometimes you don't know, sometimes the ones that you think are going to be nightmare turn out to be some of the best nights of your life. So you got to. I find you just got to sign up for all of it. And,
yeah, you do. Yeah. You take the good with the bad, absolutely. And there's definitely bad DJ gigs out there. I'll tell you.
Sure.
I'll tell you about one of them if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I'm not supposed to because this is in my book, it'll be more detailed in the book. But I'll tell you the story anyway. I'll give you a pricey version. But we got booked for this gig that was a few hours south of Sydney. I'll just say it was a coastal kind of pub, and we didn't really know anything about it. Save to say that there were some people on our agency that had played there before, so it couldn't be too bad. And I don't think I was even in town when I got booked, and then got back to Australia, and we had to go drive down. It was too far. You couldn't do it in one day. You had to stay down there. And typically when you play venues that are rural, they'll say, oh, yeah, you can stay above the pub you're playing at, which I don't like to do because those places are often reserved for people who've had too much to drink and they're not really accommodation.
Yeah.
So I went to try and book a separate accommodation, but it was like a long weekend. So I couldn't find anything. And I found this motor inn that was like half an hour further down south than we were even going. We get down there. We're driving down the south coast, and I remember calling one of my DJ friends who'd played there a couple of months before that. And she's bigger than us. She plays better gigs than us, but she'd played this. And I was like, oh, hey, and I won't say who she is. I was like, we're going down to play this place X. What's it like? And she just wrote back, turn around, go back. And I was like,
holy shit.
Yeah. And I told Chris what it said, and he's like, oh, like, could she be like
Joking?
hyperbolic here? Is she prone to exaggerating? And I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. She's like, no, it's the worst gig you'll ever play in your life. And I'm like, oh, fuck, okay. So, but we couldn't pull out. It was the day of the thing, and we're not those types of people. So we're going to do it. Right?
Part of me would also be like, I don't know if it's self-destructive or curious. I'd be like, how bad can it be?
Yeah. Famous last words, right? So we get down to, and this is not the fault of the venue, but we get down to the motor inn, right? Which definitely looked like something out of a horror film. Like it had the,
I can picture it now.
Yeah, the demountable kiosk thing that you go into with the beaded, you open the door, clang, and there's like a incandescent light. No one,
yeah.
And I'm like, hello. There's no bell. I'm like, hello. There's nothing. And then said hello again. I hear this. Yeah, I'm coming. And I'm like, oh, fucking hell. All right, okay,
what a
cool.
start.
And then it was actually a funny moment because this guy comes out and he's just like this really portly gentleman who looks largely unwashed and sort of goes to his book and he's like looking through and he's looking down, not even looking us in the eye. And I'm like, it's under Nash. And he's like, didn't say anything. And then he sort of just peers up and he's like, you guys must be from the Big Smoke. And I was like, yeah. Like, and Chris said something like, is it that obvious? But the guy was like, no, your address is on here. Like, yeah, we're from the city. So anyway, we get to our room, and it was fine, but it wasn't the kind of place you'd want to hang around before a gig. So I texted the guy who owned the place, and I said, hey, we've arrived. And he texted back saying something. It read, the Mizzo will be there to pick you up in the courtesy van in half an hour. Like, that sounds promising.
Nice.
Courtesy van. For those of you listening, not from Australia, I'm not sure whether they have them overseas, but it's, usually what pubs use to drive home people who have had too much to get their own way home. And so she ended up picking us up in the courtesy van. This courtesy van is filled with like people drunk out of their minds, stuff like that. So we get in.
Well, they were drunk already.
No, they were coming home.
Yeah, okay.
They'd been there all day.
Yeah.
Right? And so going back up to the hotel, and we're dropping them off in various places or wherever. And we're like, okay.
It doesn't bode well for the gig, does it?
And so we pull up to the car park, and there's no cars in the car park of this pub. So we're like, is everyone using the courtesy van? And she turns the lights off, and she's like, oh, we can't go in yet. And I'm like, okay, why not? She's like, oh, there's going to be a fight. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, you see those two guys like talking to the security guards? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, yeah, they've had too much. They can't come in. Security will have to knock them out. I'm like, they'll have to knock them out? She's like, yeah, we've got to wait here. So we were sitting in this courtesy van for like, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, waiting for these two guys to be knocked out by security.
It's so funny that also this has happened enough that she knows that this is the way it has to go down, right? This
is standard procedure. You know what I mean? We'll just wait here for 15 minutes, have a cigarette, lay these guys out, and then we'll take you in.
Yeah.
So we sat there for 15 minutes, and I sort of appealed to her, and I said, look, is there another way in to the pub? And she kind of looked a little bit despondent. She was like, oh, then I'll have to take you onto the dance floor. And I'm like, that's fine. Like, don't mind. We just want to have a drink before we play. So she takes us around the side, and these two big doors open up like a scout hall. Like, they've got that bar. And I could hear music coming from the other side, but it didn't sound like music from a dance floor because it wasn't loud enough. We did open up onto the dance floor, but it happened to be a really large dance floor with two tiny computer speakers as the speakers for the whole room. One guy with one tooth twerking on the dance floor, and the DJ was playing Shania Twain.
Fucking hell.
And so we were like, okay, so this is the gig, is it? Like, this is what we're doing? By this time, she's fled, right?
Yeah.
So we're on our own. And we make a beeline for the bar because we're like, we need a drink, right?
So there's one guy with like one tooth on the dance floor, but was there other people in the hall?
There were a couple of people milling around the bar, I remember, but no. He was the only one in the room besides the DJ.
Yeah, fuck. So it didn't bode well for it to be a booming gig.
Not at all, right? And playing through these tiny speakers, you can't believe.
So sorry, what time was this?
Oh, I don't remember, but it was.
It's like was
it about an hour before we had to play.
Okay, so it was like a thought maybe that more people will show up.
Yeah, we thought maybe in the next hour there'll be two guys with one tooth. But anyway, so we get to the bar, and the three things I noticed right off the bat were there was a drink special for Goon Sunrise.
Amazing.
Not sure if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah, I used to drink them all the time at uni.
Did you really?
Yeah, in Bathurst.
I didn't know they existed.
Yeah.
Is it just Goon wine and orange juice?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the drink special.
Amazing.
It was in a big container and you just tap it out. The second thing was on the wall, there were a bunch of like Polaroid style photos.
Oh, so I think there's grenadine or something, the redness to go to make the
that'll
sunrise.
Help. Yeah,
right?
sure. Yeah. So there's a bunch of Polaroids on the wall, which I thought initially were like, friends and family of the bar because you could see like employees in them.
Oh my God, please tell me these are people that are banned from the bar.
Yeah. It was a list of people that are to be refused service, and all the photos were like people being dragged out by security and someone's got a Polaroid of them. And I'm like, oh.
Quick, before you knock him out, I got to get the camera.
Yeah. And then next to that was like a employee of the month style placard with this woman's face on it. And it said, ugliest bartender of the year award goes to so-and-so.
Oh my God.
And I was blown away. I was like, how can you put that up? And before I could even think that, the woman who it was just presented herself right in front of that award. Like unaware, like seemingly unaware that there was this accolade to her physical deficit standing right behind her. And she's just like, "What can I get you guys?" And I was like,
Can you name the bar? I'm so
"No,
curious.
no, I won't do that. No, I won't do that."
Amazing. Well, we're gonna have to go on a bar crawl of the South Coast.
No, we don't. We don't have to do that.
Just to find this one.
So yeah, that was the worst gig. And yeah, so we ended up playing, and to your point earlier, there were a few more people that came in, but only between 5 and 10.
Yeah.
And Chris and I decided to sort of do back-to-back 15 minutes each rather than playing together. And at one point, he came up to me and asked me, because he'd been talking to some guy side of stage who was yelling at him, and he came up and he said, "Oh, do you have any Shania Twain?" And at the time, I was kind of busy, and I was just like, "No, I don't have any." And then I was like, "Wait." He's walking away. I'm like, "Did you just ask me any fucking Shania Twain?" And he's like, he gave me this look that was kind of like, just I'll explain later. And it turned out that the guy had been requesting it, and Chris said, "No, he definitely doesn't have any." And he said, "Ask him, or I'm going to fucking knock you out."
Holy shit.
So Chris was like, "I'll ask him, but I don't know for high hopes his Shania Twain collection."
Wow. Well, yeah, I can see why that would go into the book as one of the horror stories of the DJ.
Yeah, it wasn't our finest hour.
I wanted to ask about when you were first getting a hang of the prosthetics. What was that process like? Just in terms of just learning how to. I mean, you're learning how to use prosthetic hands and feet both at the same time. Was it a frustrating process, or did you find that you were able to just pick up things, learn things pretty quickly?
Yeah. So I didn't exactly do them both at the same time. I was walking fairly proficiently by the time I got the arms.
Yeah.
So I'd had one arm and then I got another one. But it was absolutely frustrating using prosthetic arms and learning how to do things. But I excelled the most when I was left on my own. So, because the tendency is that if I had a support worker or a carer around when I was at home and I accidentally dropped something, they would just go and pick it up for me, and I wouldn't even think about it. I'd just be like, "Oh, thanks," But then when I was on my own, I had to learn how to do things. So, if it was picking up a pen from the floor, I had to learn the best way to do that. And it's not always the way that you always think to do something. Like, for instance, I remember I was a smoker back then, and I couldn't use those big lighters with a hook because it's got that weird rotary knob, and it wasn't working very well. So I started using my toaster, like when no one was around. I just the toaster and put my cigarette in, and then my toaster broke, and then not from that as well. It was just a shit toaster, and then I wrapped up like an A4 sheet of paper and I put it under the grill in my oven. I set fire to it, and then I would run outside, light my cigarette, and stamp out the paper. And
but it's trial and error.
I'm just
right?
trying different shit, right? But I didn't like that either because even the toaster and the A4 paper aren't a transferable skill. There's something that I can't do that if I'm out in the city walking around, right?
Yep.
I could try. And so I was constantly searching for something that was more of a mobile solution to that problem. And one of the days that I was actually lighting it with this paper and stamping it out, I would pass my barbecue. And I noticed those really large matches that you light barbecues with.
Yep.
And I was like, I can do that.
Hey, yeah.
And so I sat there for the rest of the afternoon just learning how to strike a match in probably a very unsafe environment. But at the end of it, I got really proficient at striking matches. And then I got good enough that I could even use the small ones with hooks, which is quite meticulous. You have to be with hooks to pick one out.
Yep.
And then I used to just carry matches everywhere because it's, sometimes the simplest solution is the easiest.
Well, I see you've got a vape now. That must make things easier when you don't have to light things at all.
Yeah, it is. And I've been smoking these for maybe 4 years now, quite a while. And I was able to quit smoking immediately. I smoke a pack a day, sometimes more before that. So they've been really good.
I think with all the stuff you're talking about, it just reminds you that like necessity is the mother of all invention, right? I mean,
Yeah.
not only in terms of you briefing this guy on how to redesign a guitar, but also just in terms of you figuring out how to do just like all these little tasks. Yeah, I agree. If someone was around me and getting me to do like simple tasks just to prove that I was learning, rather than when I'm on my own and there's just something that I actually want to get done, I'd find that that's the point where I'm actually more driven to suddenly.
Yes. It's also a far better motivator because it's not like sitting there with an occupational therapist saying like, move this block from left to right. And you're like, okay, maybe I can do that after a while.
Yeah.
But then I've just moved a block from left to right.
Yes.
Score.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you're doing something that's practical in your own life and you're increasing your independence by learning something, even as arbitrary or specific as it might be, you're getting progress through it and you're becoming more independent. So it's a better motivator. I also think the same thing when I learned to play guitar when I was a teenager was I wouldn't learn chords or scales. I would learn songs. So it would just be like, I was big into Nirvana when I was a kid. I was like, learn how to play a Nirvana song because they're quite easy to play.
Yeah.
But then once I learned how to play 3 songs, I start to see links and I'm like, oh, he's used the same chord here. Oh, that must be that. That must be that.
Okay.
And at the end of each song, I know how to play a song. It's far more motivating than I can do 6 chords in a row but not play anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What other things did you find that were part of this learning process, just in terms of things where you had to find your own way to approach it, like with the lighting of cigarettes?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, there are so many, but the example that I typically use was learning to walk up a step for the first time.
Yeah.
And that was because I'd learned how to walk by that point, but I was only walking on flat ground.
Yeah.
And then when I tried to step up a curb for the first time, I tried the way that I'd always known how, which is just facing it and putting my foot up in front of me. You try to no avail. You start to, think of those people who say persistence is the key, which is kind of bullshit a lot of the time. Sometimes you just have to think of a different way around a problem.
Yeah.
And at that point, I realized that I didn't have ankle movement. And so if I used my hip instead, I could get up a curb easier. And so turning my body 90 degrees, I was just able to get up steps without any problem. And the salient realization there wasn't as much that I could now get up steps. It was that I had to approach every problem from a different angle at that point. And, vocationally as well, I've used it. I mean, the whole idea of starting a nightclub to become a DJ, it identifies a bunch of false assumptions such that if you want to become a DJ, you have to, buy DJ equipment. You have to learn how to DJ. You have to invest in annoying clothes. You have to make mixtapes and have, contacts with people and just stick it out playing shit venues for $2.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a different way to do anything.
True. You're now a motivational speaker.
No.
No?
I'm a speaker. I'm not a motivational speaker.
Okay. So
you have to get up before 8 in the morning to be a motivational speaker. I'm a demotivational speaker. You listen to me for an hour, you're like, fuck. It's over.
I'm going back to bed.
Yeah.
So you're a speaker. How did you get into that? What was the path that led you into that?
So I had been asked to do some talks quite early on. When I say early on, maybe I'd say 8 years ago or something. Mm-hmm. And I sort of did them not reluctantly, but I didn't know what I was doing. And it was very much that kind of, hey, look at this disabled guy talk, which I think is largely shit.
Yes.
And I didn't want to be that kind of speaker. I wanted to be able to talk about things that were actually useful to people. Ideas that they can draw on themselves, because I think it's not good enough to really just look at someone and be like, oh, he's been through some horrible stuff, so what am I complaining about? Yep. I fucking hate that concept. And so I got to work, thinking about some ideas that would be transferable to other people, that could be, adaptable. And, one of the most salient ones, I guess, is the adaptability, using adversity to your advantage, I guess, which is, I think, what I do a lot of the time is I've developed the skill of being able to reframe negative events to being positive. And I think we're awash with a lot of people that complain a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And so you need a kind of antidote to that, because it's very seductive for people to fall into, that victim nature.
I think there's
I think there's a purpose and need for somebody who is the opposite to that, and who can recognize that horrible shit does happen.
Yep.
But B, work out a way that you can actually use it to your advantage.
There are a lot of people, I think, that complain a lot, and they don't fully appreciate just how good they've got things, right? I certainly was guilty of that. I think at one stage, I felt like when I went to prison, I felt like I lost everything, and it wasn't until I felt like that I was like, actually, I still have a lot to be very grateful for.
Yeah.
So what?
Actually, can I just interject for 1 second and just say, I do like complaining, but only about really trivial shit. Right? So if you know me for more than a couple of weeks, the one thing that you'll say about me is constant whining is what you experience, right?
But what are you whining about?
Well, do you remember when I came in here and I said fucking 2-ply tissues, right? Shit like that, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And, she'll tell you stories for days on end. So I'm constantly complaining about things all the time, but only ever really small things, like how long I've been on hold for, or, how bad the pizza is at this place or something like that. I think it's really healthy to have that kind of relationship with your life where you're able to shit can most of it. And that's what I was saying to you about, like, I could never live in a place that I 100% liked every aspect of it. I need to hate 20% of it. And for me, the Inner West is perfect for that because it's very convenient. There's great food. It's close to the city, but the fucking hipsters piss me off, man.
I was about to say
they're just
Yes.
But it's perfect in that way.
Yep.
If they weren't there, what would I do?
You'd drive you insane.
What would I do? That's part of my identity, is hating them.
Yeah, you'd have to move. When you do these speaking opportunities, I mean, do you find that there are people that message you or come up to you afterwards that just say like that your message has really struck a chord with them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes that can be misinterpreted. I think along the lines of what we discussed before, of that kind of, I didn't know what I was complaining about until. Which the reason I don't like that is because, well, for starters, it kind of makes it seem like I've got this horrible life and what are they complaining about? I definitely do not have a horrible life. I feel like I'm the luckiest man on the planet. I'm really fortunate and I have a great life. Secondly, it's a really bad idea for them because that expression, there's always someone worse off than yourself. There's always someone better off than you as well.
Totally.
And that should cancel out that logic if you're of that persuasion. And thirdly, it's a great tool to never actually sort your own problems out, by thinking, oh, well, there are people worse off than I am, so I'll just sweep that under the carpet for another year. See how that goes.
I guess I didn't. I'm the kind of person that does think, oh, there's someone worse off than me, but I don't necessarily. I didn't.
Yeah.
Think, because
also Jeff Bezos. So fuck you.
Yeah, that thought doesn't come to my mind because I remember being on this transport truck to go to prison, and the guy that I was talking to said he was looking at about 20 years. And in my head, I was thinking, I'm probably looking at a couple of years. And instantly, I was feeling better about myself because I was like, fuck, well, at least it's not that bad, right? And so that instantly made me feel better, even though I was on a truck on my way to prison. But I wasn't also thinking, there's some guys not in prison.
Yeah. So you're sort of, oscillating between like narrow framing and broad framing in that way, where you're kind of like, your idea was everybody that's on this bus, I'm doing okay.
Yep.
That's a narrow framing of the thing. But on the broad framing, everyone on that bus is in fucking prison. You know what I mean? So it's like you can select the way that you look at something.
Yes.
And I think when you've got an underlying issue or something that it could be a psychological problem or in a relationship or work, it doesn't help you to brush it under the carpet. You need to give it as much credence as you do anything else in your life. It's important to note that nobody cares about your life as much as you do.
True.
And so those things have to be addressed.
I wanted to ask you because, there are times when I have this, I guess, imposter syndrome, or I have this feeling of self-loathing, which I get past because it's only very temporary. But there are times when you just you have moments where you're like everything I'm saying is bullshit, or I don't believe my own thoughts. Did you ever go through any of those kind of
all the time?
Yeah.
Sitting here with you right now. Why the fuck am I talking to you? It's no. I genuinely have imposter syndrome with everything. Take it like first of all, I'm alive.
Yes.
Secondly, which is some sort of an imposter considering what I've been through. Secondly, I went on to, run a nightclub as a DJ, not being able to DJ at the beginning. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I get invited to speak at conferences with, presidents of companies to corporate audience. What am I talking about? What are you talking about? So I constantly have imposter syndrome, but I've actually learned to embrace it. And the reason is I would rather be an imposter than an expert, because experts don't have anything to learn. An imposter always has things to learn from new people. So I get the opportunity to come and speak to you on this podcast, which I might see myself as a bit of an imposter on, but I get to learn something from you. If I go to a conference and speak at a conference and I meet interesting people and I broaden my social horizons, I become a richer person for that experience. So I just embrace it now.
There's comics that I really respect that say, if you don't feel that imposter syndrome all the time, then you shit, or you're no good, because you're meant to feel that.
Yeah.
Because that keeps pushing you forward.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. Yeah, I certainly felt that when I did TED Talk in 2019.
Yeah,
it's like 5,000 people and recorded, and you're like
crazy, right? And then it went on.
You want to hear what I got to say? Sure. Yeah.
And then it went on YouTube and got millions of views.
Yeah.
Right. And you'd feel that again, right?
Yeah.
You felt it when you had 5,000 people, but then you're also, when you're getting millions of views and people going, wow, you're like,
yeah. And that's the closest I ever got to stand-up comedy. And the only similarity was that I was standing up. That was it. Which could have gone either way with me.
Yeah, true.
Could have done it in a wheelchair. I don't actually use a wheelchair.
I wanted to ask you about sexuality with disability, because it's one topic it's a whole bunch of up and coming amazing stand-up comedians that have disabilities that talk about sexuality, and I think it's something which is an important topic which I think people have a lot of misunderstanding or just don't know anything about. What kind of things do you go through when you're obviously a bloke in your 20s to 30s? You still have all those raging hormones, right? But has that created additional challenges, just with not only with your body but also just how you feel about yourself sexually?
Yeah, so initially it did, and when I say initially, I mean when I first got out of hospital. So I had a lot of reservations about my updated value on the sexual marketplace, let's call it.
Yeah.
And they were quashed within 3 months because I ended up meeting someone.
Awesome.
That just really liked me for, not the hook. I don't know, maybe she did like the hooks. I never really asked. Maybe she was an amputee devotee. I never really got to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did get into a relationship with someone when I was like a few months out of hospital. And I think I realized at the time that, I'm very lucky in the sense that I'm a man, because women are far more charitable when it comes to things that they find attractive. And aesthetics can be lower on the list than it would for men, I would think, in most circumstances.
That's
but
interesting.
Notwithstanding, this girl was attracted, I guess, to my personality, my defiance and charisma to an extent. And I realized that it was something that, I would need to completely shift the context and focus of what value I added to people, right?
Yep.
And it harks back to that focus on what you do have, not what you've lost.
Yep.
Because then you can control the environment more and you can be attractive to people.
Yep.
Since then, I've never had a problem with women. On the contrary.
Awesome. I mean, and you still got your dick, right?
Still got everything works. Yeah, I'm just down 4 limbs.
Yeah,
which some people like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's cool. So did that relationship didn't continue? That was
that was only a couple of months or something like that. But it was one of those things where you need to know it can happen.
Yep.
And then it's your responsibility to make it happen more.
That must have felt really cool that happened only after a few months,
yeah,
right?
It was quite lucky.
This is not the end.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We're going to keep on going, baby.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Have you ever used dating apps?
Yeah, I have. Not much, because the last relationship I was in was just over 5 years, and that ended in 2020. So dating apps weren't, I'm not sure when. It was like 2014. I think I used it a bit around 2014 or something. Apparently, it's got far more advanced now, and I've been into long-term relationships since it's gotten advanced. So I haven't used it since then. Yeah. Do you use them?
I do use them, and I mean, I guess this is semi-related. I have, I guess, a social disability. I have to mention to them that I've been to prison because, like, otherwise it could be quite.
Oh yeah.
Not everyone is on board with that.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, you had some great jokes about that. Was it the my favorite one was the convictions joke?
Looking for my girls looking for their partner in crime, and then some other girls are looking for a guy with strong convictions. But yeah, I found because I mean there was a time when I was a drug dealer when I would go on many dates with a girl before I mentioned that, and then like at that point they're already liking me, and so it felt quite manipulative.
Right. Okay. That's like, you have a kid and you don't tell them you got a kid.
Yeah, exactly. So what I found was I just try and be upfront about that I've been to prison, and that's just part of my story.
But do you feel that makes you look like a bit of a compulsive kind of your first date, and you're like, by the way, I've just been
well, so I
just got out actually.
I usually mention it on a dating app like pretty early in the conversation.
Okay, yeah. But you don't put it in your profile?
I think at one stage I did. I think I might have taken it out now because I felt like maybe I didn't want to scare them off the first second. I was like, maybe if I can chat to them and win them over with my personality for a second and then mention it, that's not so manipulative. But if it's literally just mentioned in the profile, like, oh yeah, a comedian and I went to prison.
Yeah, but you've got a public profile now, so they would be able to find that out with Google.
Absolutely. If they just Google, like, and I also, I mean, if I talk about comedy, I do comedy about prison, so I mention it pretty quickly. But yes, I'm very Googleable. But I also felt like that is something that, there are people, I think, if you're talking about like things like that, or if you've got a kid, or if you've got a disability, that it's easier just to have that conversation straight up. Because if someone's not into that, totally fine. But you don't want to waste your own time or theirs.
Interesting. So I often get that people didn't realize I have no legs or I've lost my legs, because I can walk fairly proficiently.
Yeah.
And I think also that the hooks sort of take the eye a bit more. Yeah. And people don't think about the legs. Yeah. And I've been with people before who didn't know I didn't have legs, or but it's not that I've was holding it, like trying to hide it. I just forgot to tell him.
Yeah, that's totally fair, right? It's part of your life. You don't think you need to mention it every second.
Well, you just get, I mean, I'm so used to the physiology of my body that I don't ever feel the need to, like, if anyone asks, I'm telling them.
And what, has there been a situation with a girl where they were totally fine with like hooks for hands, but when they found out that you also had prosthetic legs, that weirded them out?
No, that's never been a problem. But I've had situations where girls have been like, oh, I didn't, like, for the first, did you know or not? Sorry, for the listeners of my girlfriends in the room.
I didn't know for the first couple of years of meeting you.
Oh, there you go. So she didn't know. We weren't together then.
Yeah.
I saw you walking up the stairs out of Club 77 and I thought that guy's real fucked.
Holy shit.
And then someone had to tell me.
Yeah. Which could have been true at the same time.
Yeah.
But holy shit! So you knew him, but the movement was it was non-obvious because
because I mean, if you didn't know I'd lost my legs and I walked in here, you probably wouldn't think about it.
No,
because I walk okay. Yeah, and I think people who, like, if I met someone in a bar or something like that, and we just had a few drinks and we could do that a couple of times, then I'd have to be like, oh yeah, and I had to get my leg fixed, and they'd be like, well, what? Like, what are you talking about? Just got a new one, and
yeah. And in terms of just like you learning the mechanics of how to move your body with all things, I guess the first couple of times you had sex, you just had to learn how to do that.
Yeah,
right?
you work out whether it's easier to have them on or off, and the answer to that is there is no answer. It kind of depends on what you're doing exactly.
Yeah.
But obviously, like, they're not the most comfortable things, even for me to sleep in. So I don't typically sleep with my prosthetics on. Yeah. Just because they're made of carbon fiber and metal, and
of course.
Yeah. And so you can imagine it's often not as comfortable for the person I'm laying with either.
Totally.
Yeah. So there's a balance between that kind of stuff, and
I mean, it's cool. It's cool to just you got to go through that learning process as part of life, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, basically.
No, I really love those conversations because it's I've got a nephew who's paraplegic, and I think the talks about talking about sexuality for anyone is such an important part because we're all sexual beings, you know.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. I know that your book is called Hook, Line, and Sinner. I was interested about the sinning.
Well, I mean, it's just I think it's a cheeky title. I didn't come up with the title, by the way. My brother-in-law did. I think it's a brilliant title, though. But it's an unexpected memoir. It's an unexpected trajectory, which is what I think I touched on before.
Yep.
Because most of the time when you read about someone who's gone through disability, they either become, I don't know, the poster child for some sporting thing. They're a Paralympian, or they're a you can do anything, or look at me, I have a disability type person, which is fine. They have their place. You don't often hear about disabled people running nightclubs and taking LSD.
Yeah. Totally.
And so there are parts of that, I think, which play into the title a little bit. But
you just described to me a fun person.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. We've only known each other for an hour. I've won you over already.
Yes, DJ Acid Tick Tick. I'd be like, when are we hanging out?
Yeah, I also like pizza. So.
Oh my God! Wow,
not dog pizza.
Well, it was still human grade food. I think you could give it a try.
Hey, what's your favourite pizza in Sydney?
What is my favourite pizza now that my store doesn't exist? I think Bella Bruta in Newtown.
That's a good one, yeah.
Probably number one.
So here's something that you might not know about me, or you definitely wouldn't. For a period, a few years ago, I used to be a food critic.
Wow,
right?
That's cool.
I shouldn't call it a food critic, just a writer. But I used to review restaurants, first for a rag called City Hub, and then just on my own blog. And one of the questions I always used to ask people when we're in an interview type situation was, if the world was ending tomorrow, what would your last meal be? Can you answer that for me? But can you answer two versions of it? One, what would be your actual last meal? And you can go anywhere in the world, anywhere you've been, or it might be something your grandmother cooked when you were younger, or it could be just a local place. But then in the second one, can you give me your last prison meal?
Oh, wow. Okay. Last meal on Earth.
Don't feel shy about the microphone, as I'll speak right into
it. All right, podcast host.
it.
I think just like I'm not a fancy guy. I think I would just go a really greasy pepperoni pizza with like just shitloads of cheese and shitloads of pepperoni.
Really like pepperoni, don't you?
Yeah. Just
okay. Well, if you had to have a pepperoni pizza anywhere, where would it be as your last meal?
Oh wow! If only my restaurant was still open. Where's there's a place called Epic Pizza. They go these enormous pizzas.
Did they used to be on Crown Street?
Yeah.
I think,
There might be another one. I maybe go there, or Via Napoli
Via
is another
Napoli,
one.
yeah.
They've got these ones that are like a 1 meter long. I would just get like the most absurdly long pizza and
so
just
it's quantity over quality.
Well, it's also a good restaurant, but I think I would just want to eat until I'm full and just feel like greasy and fat, and just be like, come on, meteor. Like,
Okay, cool.
Let's end it. In terms of prison, are we talking like I'm on death row and I can order anything, or am I like, has it got to be a prison?
Of the ones that you had, of everything you've eaten in prison, what would be the pick if Meteor was coming?
I think just because of the amount of good times I had with it, on Sundays, what we would do is guys would chip in, and you could get powdered eggs on the buy-up that we got every week, and cans of...
what does on the buy-up mean?
So buy-up is like every week there's a grocery list of things you can get, like chips and chocolate and soft drink and noodles and all kinds of stuff. And you can only buy that if you have loved ones putting money into your account, or otherwise sometimes you can work a job in prison for a little bit of money, or otherwise you get paid about $17 a week just for being a prison inmate.
Right.
Just because otherwise it turns into the haves and the have-nots, and that creates friction. So I was lucky enough, my family were putting money into my account, and then you can buy $100 worth of groceries a week.
Right.
So I was getting like packets of chips and soft drink and like mee goreng and all kinds of stuff. So you're in your cell for 18 hours a day. So you it's good to and the food. While I thought it was fine, the servings aren't very big. So and you get served dinner at like 2 p.m. So
What?
Because the kitchens are run by the inmates,
Yeah.
and they have to get locked away, right?
Okay.
So
Dinner at 2 p.m.
so you have breakfast at 8 a.m. or
Yeah.
7:45. I was having at Long Bay. I was having lunch at I think it was like 10:20, and then 1:45 you're back in your cell, and your dinner's there waiting for you for
Right.
like 2 p.m. So you'd eat it while it's still hot because you don't really have the heating system. So you'd eat that, and then by 6 p.m. You're watching the news and you're hungry again. So you need to so you really need to have extra food.
And that's where that buy-up thing comes
That's
in.
when the buy-up comes in handy. But guys also use it for gambling. You know, you'd bet someone a $5 can of tuna or something like that. So it was used as prison currency as well. But my favourite activity, or one of my favourite things was on Sundays. Guys would all chip in. There'd be a whole bunch of guys, and some guys would get cans of Spam. Some guys would get the powdered eggs, and various other bits and pieces. And we had like a hot plate out in the yard, and then we'd cook up these Spam and egg sandwiches. And I'd have a nice coffee, and I'd just have it was like having a bacon egg roll, but it was like 8 or 10 guys all working together, and someone would be slicing the Spam while someone made the egg mixture. And then we'd all sit there, and someone would bring out barbecue sauce, and then we're all sitting there, and then guys who like didn't chip in because they don't have anything, we'd at the end we'd be like talking, should we give Dave a sandwich? Like try and be magnanimous to a few extra people. But it was just it just made you have this sense of like normality.
Right. I was going to ask, how much of it was the actual meal, and how much of it was that?
It did taste
behavior?
really good.
Yeah.
I must admit, the first time I bought a can of Spam, I didn't realize that you need to cook it. I just ate it out of the tin. I was like, this tastes like shit. And I was like, what have I done? What a waste of money.
Yeah.
But then they're like, no, you idiot. You got to cook it on a hot plate.
Right.
And so it's actually, I mean, obviously my bar for things of enjoying taste had gone down a fair bit. But powdered eggs and Spam on a toasted piece of white bread, just sitting there with a couple of fellas, just felt like heaven to me.
I always think that context can make food taste better.
Oh, absolutely.
Objectively.
Absolutely. So with I used to, because I was so bored in prison, I wrote prison meal reviews of all my lunches and dinners, and I always added the context of what was going on that day because, you're right. If you're like having a really good day, the food's going to taste way better. Yeah. If you're like, I saw Paul get stabbed. Sorry, I shouldn't have. I wasn't ready for that. This sandwich is getting a lower score because it wasn't a fantastic day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of the reviews that I do on stage, which is exactly this, was I say it was a corned beef and salad sandwich. This was like my 10th day. Corned beef and salad sandwich. With cheese and honey mustard. And then I read out this review on stage, and I say, today my fiancée told me that she's leaving me and that she's rehomed my dogs. This has affected my enjoyment of the sandwich.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
And then I go 4.2 out of 10, right? And so I say, well...
I'm sorry. 0.2? Where'd that come from? Where are you 0.2
Well, I'm scoring every day. Like, sometimes it was a 3.7, sometimes it was a 4.2.
Yeah.
It was, just is a gut feel. So, and then I point out, look, a 4.2, when you've just told it that your fiancé is leaving you and that she's rehomed your dogs, it's still pretty good. I think that shows just how good the sandwich was.
It's interesting. Maybe Yelp should add that as a feature. So when you're reviewing the restaurant, because often I find when you look at reviews of places, all the bad ones always start out with something like, my mother-in-law picked this restaurant for us or something like that. And the service turned out to be horrible.
Was it the restaurant or was it the company?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And you can almost piece together.
My wife told me that she's having an affair during our spaghetti dinner.
Yeah. The spaghetti, by the way, was shit. Never coming back.
You're so right.
Yeah.
They take it out on the poor restaurant.
Yeah. And actually, there's a thing that I do. I often talk about, which harks back a little to the managing of expectations thing, which is whenever I stay at a hotel, or an Airbnb, right before I get there, I read the bad reviews about it, because then if it is bad, you're kind of primed and you expect it. But if it's great, you've just manufactured a great experience for yourself, because you're like, well, what was Jane 34 talking about? I think this room's fucking excellent.
Yep.
Yeah.
I find most of the time when there's a negative review, you can read into it that
You do whatever you want with it.
It was more.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's more the person. You can read that it's more was the person than the actual venue.
Yeah.
But
you can also make it look however you want. Nothing has perfect reviews.
No.
Like, like if you're going through it, let's say you and your partner are working out like, oh, where are we going to stay in Bali or something like that, right? And you got this one's got 4.9. Like, oh, let's read the shittest reviews. You read that one, you're like, oh, we're not staying there. What are you going to stay at the 4.6? It's got more,
right?
Trust me.
I only ever, that's so true. Whenever I read the reviews, I only read the bad ones.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity.
Of course. You want to know what's wrong with it.
Yeah. I never read the ones, the 5-star ones.
So yeah, read next time you stay at a hotel, just before you walk in the door, read the really bad reviews and just see the effect that it has on your experience staying there.
What was the driving force behind the book? Did someone suggest this to you, or was this something that you felt was burning inside you? You had a story you wanted to write.
I really like writing. As
Yep.
I said, I'd done that sort of food writing before, and it's another creative outlet again. And it's something that I've always enjoyed doing. I've done a few articles for online magazines and publications and stuff. And I did think that some sort of biography in some way could transmit the ideas that I was talking about before that could be of benefit to other people in some way. However, I'm only 40, so it's not exactly memoir area.
Yep.
So I actually prefer to relate to it as a semiography, such that I hope this isn't the last you hear from me.
Yes. Wow.
But it does, document part of my life that I learned a lot of lessons that I think people can gain something from as well. But that's pretty much it. And I took my time writing it because I didn't have a deal until about a year ago.
Yep.
I had a couple of offers here and there, but I wanted to have more of it together before. A lot of the time when you write nonfiction, you don't have to have the whole thing finished before you get a deal.
I'm in that boat right now.
Yeah. So they'll just look at your TikTok following and be like, yeah, we could probably sell a book, which is fine. But you got to know whether it's going to be good.
Yeah.
And so I spent quite a bit of time in 2019. I'd taken many notes over the years and written, but not huge long form stuff. And so I took about 4 or 5 months in 2019. I went over to France and that was my only job, was just to sit at cafes with a little iPad and just write. And I think I wrote 50 or 60,000 words. And it came together in a sense where I at least saw that it could be something.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, this could be something. And then I just waited for the right person or the right publisher to come along. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, I got a message from Justin Ratcliffe, who was a publisher at Penguin up until recently. And I'd been approached by a couple of publishers, but they were kind of like, hey, saw your TED Talk. Have you thought about writing a book? Which is, I understand that. Yeah. But he also had been to Starfuckers.
Yeah, okay. So he got a bit about the background.
He was like, yeah, I used to come to 77. I've seen you DJ before. So I'm like, all right. Immediately, this guy knows a little bit more about what I would be writing about.
It makes a big difference when someone gets it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because they're not going to be, when I start talking about like nightclubs and all this nefarious kind of stuff, they're not going to be like, whoa, we wanted the what do you call it?
This
like
wasn't our
cookie
vision.
cutter tale of the disabled guy. That, so I knew that he was kind of like that, so I agreed to meet with him, and he was a really great guy, lived local to me and everything, and so I just decided to go with it with Penguin. So.
And so the book's coming out, by the time this is published, it'll be right before the book comes out.
Yeah, it just came out today.
Yes.
It's scheduled, I think, for August 29th.
Great. All right.
So I'll be in the States before that. We get back a week before. So I'm going to be running around and signing books with my hook.
Yes, awesome. And doing some kind of little press tour, hopefully.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, which this will be a part of.
Awesome.
Make it look like I'm doing it now.
By then, who knows?
Yeah.
The listenership of Shit's Gone Sideways.
That's true. And you know what else? I'm going to look much fatter by then because we're going to the United States for 5 weeks.
Fantastic.
For some work stuff. And I'm just going to be eating like Texas barbecue and burgers in New York. And so I'm going to come back about 5 or 6 kilos heavier than now. So this is the perfect podcast because I still don't look like a cane toad.
Well, I'm not even sure if I'll ever get allowed back into America, so I'll have to live vicariously through you, mate.
Yes, of course. We'll smuggle you in or something like that.
So what else? So the book will be coming out imminently, and then like what else is on the cards for you? You had talked about you get sucked into these obsessions or these hobbies that you go through. What are you into at the moment?
That's a good question. I do a lot of video stuff now as well. Something that I got into.
Yep.
So I do a little bit of that.
Yep.
I'm also quite busy with speaking now. And that's taking up a lot of my time as well as content stuff. So
That's cool.
I'm doing South by Southwest this year.
Oh, amazing! So
Which
I
is
was
in
going to say
Sydney.
with the speaking stuff, is that a full-fledged career? Is that
Right now,
possible?
it's my only sustaining career. Yeah,
Great.
that's right. Yeah,
Great.
Because the DJing isn't that lucrative. But yeah, so right now it's speaking stuff.
and hopefully some book royalties very shortly.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Someone's gonna have to buy it for that to happen. So I think there'll be 3 people that read my book and they'll listen to it on Audible, and one of them is my mother. So
Yeah. So sorry. So go ahead. Yes.
yeah, no, sorry, yeah. So doing South by Southwest this year, which I'm I guess the most excited about, apart from engagements I have in the US, looking to do some more stuff over there as well. But South by Southwest will be a fun one. This is the first time they've come out of Austin, and are doing it in Sydney.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
very cool.
It's very cool, yeah. So it's a week-long conference, and it's in October. I think it's mid-October.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be, it'll be like TED on steroids or something like that,
Amazing.
I guess.
So how many people are you going to be talking in front of? Do they tell
I
you
don't
that
know,
yet?
actually. I don't know. I'll do it in front of 5 people. I don't care.
You're giving me flashbacks to my Melbourne Comedy Festival run recently.
But you did well with that, right? You got the newcomer award, was it?
I did go well. Yes, thank you. I got
congrats.
nominated for it.
Yeah.
But my first night there, I did the show to I had 5 tickets sold, and I was mentally preparing myself to do the show to 5 people, and then 17 showed up on the door. So I had it's a small room, so it was a proper crowd, and I had such a hot show, and I'm like, I'm a golden god. This is going to be like what it's like every night. And the next night I had 4 sold. I'm like, that's fine. Heaps of people show up on the door. And then no one else showed up. And it was just 4 people. And I had to do an hour of comedy to 4 people. And luckily they were fully into it. But in my head,
What was the venue?
it was a cocktail bar called the Bard's Apothecary in Melbourne CBD, and they were amazing to me. They were so supportive, and it was the perfect room for me because it felt like a prison, a cell. It was just this small little brick dungeon.
Yeah.
So I plugged away there at 10:40 at night every night, and slowly, I had the advantage on Mondays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays that I was the only show on at that time. So people would get pissed and they'd look through the guide and be like, oh, there's only one show on. It's some guy talking about prison. Do you want to go to that? And people would be like, yeah, actually that sounds exactly like what we're going to do when we're half cut, right?
Yeah.
So
we're going to go to quite a few comedy clubs in America. I've been looking up, going Mothership in Austin.
Yep, Joe Rogan's. Yep.
Yeah, Cellar obviously in New York, as well as probably a couple of others, and I think Comedy Store in LA. But what I found out was that none of my favorite comics are going to be playing any time that I'm over there.
That's
and
okay.
Nate Bargatze, who I really wanted to see, is actually playing in Sydney while we're gone.
Yeah, wow. Well, look, sometimes you go to these clubs and someone you've never heard of makes you laugh harder than you've ever heard in your life.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing about comedy.
I'm hoping there's some walk-ins because I remember 9 years ago I was at the Cellar and Patton Oswalt did a walk-in.
They get that at the Cellar all the time, right? I remember there was some famous story from a few years ago where they had Dave Chappelle, Aziz Ansari, Jerry Seinfeld, Amy Schumer all did drop-ins on the one night, and and Chappelle got up and goes, "You just saw $1 billion worth of comedy for $25 for $25 and a 2-drink minimum." Yeah, so that's really cool. I mean, we have the Australian version of that where we have drop-ins, but it's like it's Hughesy, Dave Hughes, you know.
Where do you play around Sydney usually?
All over. So I mean, the best one to do is the Comedy Store at the Entertainment Quarter, which I feel very fortunate to have been able to do already.
How big is that room?
I think it fits like 300 odd.
Oh, that's pretty good.
So yeah, and that room, there's so much interesting social psychology to comedy that when people go to the Comedy Store, it's like it costs more, and it's also like it's a special venue you have to go to at the Entertainment Quarter, and it's usually people go there as a date night, so they're already mentally like this is going to be a good show, and they assume it's a Comedy Store, it's the best venue in Sydney, that they're going to put on good acts. So you're already mentally like, this is going to be a good show. And that does half the work for you. So that when you go out there and you say your jokes, they just kill in a way. Whereas if you go to some random pub and they're like, oh, hey, there's comedy on. And like,
Hope this doesn't bother you, but this guy will be talking about prison in the corner.
If you this is a comedy show and you're like, oh, you're like, take it or leave it, and like you're there and it only costs you a few bucks, then like you're not really, you're more in the headset of, you're more combative mindset. You're like, okay, impress me, make me laugh. Whereas there's this, you notice all these things about comedy venues and the way that they structure both the room and also how they sell the show, that all goes into it. But yeah, I do gigs all over, kind of mostly inner Sydney, kind of Newtown or Potts Point, all kind of places like that. But now more and more I'm getting more regional opportunities, and I find like those gigs sometimes are just the absolute best. The further west I go, the more jail material seems to go better.
You're like, found my market. Okay.
They're like, oh, mate, oh yeah. Oh, guys, come to me.
Here's a question. Would you ever do comedy at a prison?
So good question. This is on my list of my 10-year goals.
Yeah,
I've started by hopefully I'm going to be invited into a juvenile detention center soon to do just speak to the boys about just my life. But that's the first step. I've done my working with children check, and I work with a couple of guys that go in there already as youth mentors.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to get the green light to go in there in the next 6 months. And then I want to hopefully work that way up to one day being able to film a comedy special in Long Bay Jail.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Would be so much fun.
Yeah.
And I think it would hopefully be mutually beneficial that because the guards or the governor of the prison could also be like, hey boys, if you just behave for a little while, we can do this.
Yeah.
And so it hopefully could
I thought you were going to say it'd be good promotion for them. We want to really get the word out there about Long Bay. It's the place to be.
A good draw card to help them just like, if there's
we are going
to
bury Silverwater.
So anyway, we'll see what happens with that. But I think it's not completely impossible because my main audience at the moment seems to be either corrections officers, cops, lawyers, and crims, either ex-crims or current crims. That seems to be the people that come to my shows.
I find that interesting because I think that regular people that don't fit those categories often have quite a fascination with underworld stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, true crime podcasts are booming. And I think that's definitely something which has been to my advantage. The people, when I'm at noisy gigs where they're not really listening to people, when I start talking about prison, people usually shut up because they're like, this is interesting.
You were talking about the stuff that you were doing with the kids.
Yeah, so that's a pathway, hopefully, for me to one day be able to go in and perform at a prison. But I think it's just cool that those are buckets of people that identify to me that they come and perform, that they like coming to my shows. But I think that the step for me now is that I'm moving towards is just trying to work on material that is not prison related. I used it as a vehicle because it was something which I felt strongly about, and it tapped into that creative mind. And it was something that differentiated myself that I could write jokes about. But now it's like, okay, you've done that. You've done that show. Now, I was worried that it was just like a one-trick pony. This was
you don't want to be
write about.
typecast. Yeah, right.
And so I've had other comics go, no, you're not a guy that does jokes about prison. You're a comedian who just chose to do jokes about prison, right? But you can do jokes about whatever you want, and that I think felt quite reassuring to me because there were times where I felt a bit of that imposter syndrome where I was like, I've only had the success that I've had because I had a good story behind me, and when that runs out, I'm fucked.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of what I was trying to get at before when you were saying talking about the public speaking stuff of wanting to be of value to people over and above my disability or just having a disability.
Absolutely.
Like finding those things, within you that were relatable and transferable and adding value to people's lives is very important, at least from my perspective. So for you, it's going to be like, okay, what do I segue into now? Now that I've got this persona, and I talk about prison and all these types of things, but you've obviously got that kernel and that spark where you can make things funny no matter what they are.
Yeah.
You're not going to necessarily go and talk about, I don't know, airlines or something like that, but you could segue into something that's sort of adjacent prison thematically, at least.
Yeah.
And then which would open you up to a broader style of comedy, I guess.
I think that's what I've seen with some of the content you put online that were you talking about. I mean, it's stuff which is compelling, but it doesn't have to, it just has no relation to you having a disability, right? It's about mindset. It's about all these other kinds of things, which is cool because it's like, you could be successful as a speaker talking about those things without having any disability.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
If you just,
And it's interesting because a lot of the I guess lessons that I've learned on life have been fast tracked by the fact that I do have a disability, but they're not related specifically to people who have gone through trauma or hardship or physical adversity, and all of that kind of advantage from adversity stuff that I talk about, which I like to think of as anti-fragility, which is an idea that was developed by Nassim Taleb when he talks about economies and ecologies and stuff like that. Being anti-fragile in a sense is something, it's a skill that you can develop when you have a disability. But I think that anyone can develop it. I don't think you have to go through that.
Is this the same thing as resilience? What does this mean?
Well, no, it is more than resilience. So if you think about like a wine glass being fragile, a rock being resilient, anti-fragile would be something like your muscular system. If you lift weights, you get stronger. Or your immune system. If you're exposed to small parts of a virus, you will develop antibodies to it. Yeah. And so it's using the small negative things that happen to you to actually get stronger as a result. And I think you can do that in your life by reframing those negative events where you can,
True. I think there was something which I read at the very start of your book, which really resonated with me. You obviously chosen for a reason, which was this quote by Thomas Paine. It said, "The harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. I love the man that can smile in trouble, that can gather strength from distress and grow brave by reflection." And that really, just reading that resonated with me because, that's a big part about why this podcast exists. That sometimes you don't really find out much about yourself until you have those conflict moments. Yeah. And then you find that within you have the resources to rise to the occasion. Yeah. And that's something which I'm constantly going through a learning process of learning about myself, and that was for me such a big thing, was going through this mess of my own making and then figuring out, okay, well, what kind of man do you want to be, and realizing I didn't really like the man that I was, but I had the capabilities to change that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that's why, I love talking to people on this podcast about crisis points and how they've and how that redirected them into such a positive path. Yeah.
And sometimes, negative events can be accelerators for those things, as you just pointed out. Yeah. And I always found for me, one of my frustrating pain points, I guess, was, I often get people that say to me, I couldn't have gone through what you did and survived or come out positive on the other end. And when I started to think about, because people say that to me all the time, the more frustrated I got because I was like, well, you don't know that. Yeah, I probably would have thought that as well before. You don't know what you're capable of until you're truly put in the position. And if they get anything from my story is that, okay, you don't know, and you might be extremely well adept to adapt and get through horrible circumstances and be absolutely fine.
I think a lot of people, go through life not realizing just the strength that they have within them until they're tested, right? So that I can imagine, it doesn't surprise me that people would say that to you because they when they haven't been tested, they just don't know.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
but we're there's that driving force within people, particularly when you reach conflict, that is so impressive. That's why I love spending my time talking to people that have gone through that, because not only are the stories so fascinating, but it's just such a message that I think a lot of people can benefit from hearing.
Yeah. Well, I hope so.
Awesome. Well, Hook, Line and Sinner is officially out now. I've read the prologue, and it was awesome, man. So I look forward to reading the full book.
I'll send it to you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Tom,
for having me on.
coming
Appreciate
on.
it.
Cheers, brother. Appreciate it.